Maria Elena Vasquez had always been known for her bright smile and gentle nature in the small village of San Miguel. At 23, she worked as a nurse at the local clinic, caring for children and elderly patients with the same tenderness she had shown since childhood. Her dark hair was always neatly braided, and her brown eyes sparkled with warmth whenever she spoke to patients or their families. The village sat nestled in a valley surrounded by mountains, where coffee plantations stretched across the hillsides like green carpets. Life moved slowly here, marked by the rhythm of harvest seasons and religious festivals. People knew each other by name, and families had lived on the same land for generations. But in recent months, everything had changed. The civil war that had been raging in distant parts of the country had finally reached their peaceful valley. Government forces and rebel groups fought for control of strategic locations, and San Miguel found itself caught in the crossfire. The sound of gunfire echoed through the mountains at night, and families began to disappear without explanation. Maria Elena continued her work at the clinic despite the growing danger. She believed that helping people was more important than her own safety. Dr. Rodriguez, the elderly physician who ran the clinic, had begged her to leave for the capital city where her aunt lived, but she refused. The village needed medical care, especially with so many injuries from the fighting. One evening in late autumn, Maria Elena was walking home from the clinic when she noticed unusual activity near the town square. Military trucks had arrived and soldiers in green uniforms were setting up a checkpoint. She recognized them as government forces by their patches and equipment. The villagers watched nervously from their doorways and windows. As Maria Elena hurried toward her small house on the outskirts of the village, she heard her name being called. She turned to see Father Miguel, the village priest, motioning for her to come to the church. His usually calm face looked troubled, and his hands shook slightly as he gestured. "Maria Elena, you must be very careful," he whispered when she approached. "The soldiers are asking questions about people who might be helping the rebels. They have a list of names, and some villagers have been taken for questioning." Maria Elena felt her heart race. She had indeed been providing medical care to anyone who needed it, regardless of which side they supported in the conflict. Just last week, she had treated a young man with a bullet wound who claimed to be a farmer, but she suspected he might have been involved in the fighting. Her duty as a nurse was to help the injured, not to judge their politics. That night, Maria Elena barely slept. She lay in her small bed, listening to the sounds outside her window. Dogs barked in the distance, and she could hear the occasional rumble of military vehicles patrolling the streets. She thought about her parents, who had died in a car accident 3 years earlier, and wished they were there to guide her through this difficult time. The next morning brought an unexpected knock at her door. When Maria Elena opened it, she found Captain Santos, a middle-aged officer with graying hair and tired eyes. Behind him stood 2 younger soldiers carrying rifles. "Miss Vasquez," Captain Santos said politely but firmly, "we need to speak with you about your activities at the clinic. Please come with us." Maria Elena's hands trembled as she gathered her shawl and locked her door. She had heard stories about people who were taken for questioning and never returned. As they walked toward the temporary military headquarters that had been set up in the old school building, she tried to stay calm and think about how to answer their questions honestly without putting anyone in danger. The interrogation room was a former classroom where children's drawings still hung on the walls, creating a strange contrast with the military equipment and maps that now covered the teacher's desk. Captain Santos sat across from Maria Elena while the 2 soldiers stood guard by the door. "We know you've been treating injured people at the clinic," Captain Santos began. "We need to know if any of these people were rebels or rebel sympathizers. The government is trying to restore order to this region, and we need cooperation from civic-minded citizens like yourself." Maria Elena chose her words carefully. "Captain, I am a nurse. I took an oath to help anyone who is sick or injured, regardless of who they are. When someone comes to the clinic bleeding or in pain, I don't ask them about their politics. I just try to save their life." The captain studied her face for a long moment. "That's very noble, Miss Vasquez. But these are not normal times. The rebels are using medical facilities to treat their wounded fighters so they can return to battle against legitimate government forces. By helping them even unknowingly, you might be prolonging this conflict and causing more deaths." For 3 hours, Captain Santos questioned Maria Elena about specific patients, dates, and treatments. She answered truthfully when she could, but refused to provide information that might put her patients at risk. The captain seemed frustrated but not entirely unsympathetic to her position. Finally, he stood up and walked to the window overlooking the village square. "Miss Vasquez, I'm going to release you today, but I want you to understand something. My superiors are under pressure to show results in this operation. They want names, locations, and evidence of rebel activity. If you continue to protect people who might be enemies of the state, you could find yourself in serious trouble." Maria Elena left the school building feeling shaken but relieved. As she walked back to the clinic, she noticed that several houses that had been occupied the day before now stood empty, their doors hanging open. Families had fled during the night, taking only what they could carry. Dr. Rodriguez was waiting for her at the clinic with obvious relief. "Thank God you're safe," he said, embracing her like a father. "Maria Elena, I think it's time for you to consider leaving. This situation is only going to get worse." But Maria Elena had made her decision. "Dr. Rodriguez, if I leave now, who will take care of the people who can't leave? Who will treat the children when they get sick? Who will help the elderly with their medicine?" That afternoon, as Maria Elena organized medical supplies, she heard commotion outside. Through the clinic window, she saw a group of soldiers escorting several villagers toward the military headquarters. Among them was Carlos Mendez, a young teacher who had been vocal about social justice issues, and Esperanza Torres, a midwife who had delivered most of the babies in the village over the past 20 years. The sight filled Maria Elena with dread. She realized that the net was closing around anyone who might be considered suspicious or uncooperative. Her conversation with Captain Santos had been a warning, and she understood that her time was running out. As evening approached, Maria Elena made a difficult decision. She would continue her work at the clinic, but she would also begin making preparations to help vulnerable villagers escape if necessary. She had contacts in the mountains who might be able to guide people to safety, and she knew hidden paths through the coffee plantations that could be used to avoid military checkpoints. That night, Maria Elena sat at her kitchen table and wrote a letter to her aunt in the capital, explaining the situation and asking her to prepare a place for refugees who might need shelter. She sealed the letter carefully and hid it in her medical bag, planning to find someone trustworthy to deliver it the next day. Outside her window, the mountains loomed dark against the starry sky. Somewhere in those hills, she knew that people were hiding, fighting, and dying. She thought about the Hippocratic Oath she had learned in nursing school. First, do no harm. In a time of war, she was beginning to understand how complicated that simple principle could become. As Maria Elena finally drifted off to sleep, she had no idea that her actions had already been noticed by people on both sides of the conflict, and that her life was about to change in ways she could never have imagined. 3 weeks passed after Maria Elena's first interrogation, and the situation in San Miguel grew increasingly tense. More families disappeared each night, and the military presence had doubled. Captain Santos had been replaced by a younger, more aggressive officer named Lieutenant Vargas, who showed no patience for what he called rebel sympathizers. Maria Elena continued her work at the clinic, but she noticed that fewer patients were coming for treatment. People were afraid to be seen seeking medical care, worried that they might be questioned about their injuries or their reasons for visiting the clinic. The atmosphere of fear was making her job nearly impossible. One rainy Thursday morning, Maria Elena was organizing medicine when she heard urgent knocking at the clinic door. She opened it to find Ana Guerrero, a woman from the village, holding her 8-year-old son Miguel, who was burning with fever and barely conscious. "Please, Maria Elena," Ana begged, tears streaming down her face. "Miguel has been sick for 3 days. He won't eat, and his fever won't break. I was afraid to bring him sooner because of the soldiers, but now I'm scared he might die." Maria Elena quickly brought them inside and examined the child. Miguel had all the symptoms of severe pneumonia, and his condition was critical. She started him on antibiotics and worked to bring down his fever, but she knew he needed more advanced care than the small clinic could provide. "Ana, Miguel needs to be taken to the hospital in the provincial capital," Maria Elena explained gently. "His lungs are very infected, and without proper treatment, he could die." Ana's face went pale. "But Maria Elena, we have no way to get there. The buses stopped running last week because of the fighting, and we don't have a car. The soldiers won't let anyone leave the village without special permission." Maria Elena made a decision that would change everything. "I'll find a way to get him there myself," she said firmly. "Let me make some arrangements." Through her network of contacts, Maria Elena learned about a group of people who helped transport refugees and medical emergencies through the mountains using hidden paths. The group was led by a man known only as El Jaguar, who had been helping people escape the violence for months. That evening, Maria Elena met with a contact at an abandoned warehouse on the edge of the village. The woman, who called herself Carmen, explained the plan. "We can take the boy and his mother to the capital tomorrow night," Carmen said. "But you should know that this is very dangerous. If we're caught, we'll all be accused of helping rebels escape. Are you sure you want to be involved?" Maria Elena thought about Miguel's fevered face and his mother's desperate eyes. "Yes," she said without hesitation. "I'll do whatever it takes to save that child." The next day proceeded normally at the clinic, but Maria Elena felt nervous energy building inside her. She had told Ana to bring Miguel after dark, and they would meet the transport group at a coffee plantation 2 miles outside the village. As the sun set, Maria Elena packed emergency medical supplies and prepared to leave. Just as she was about to lock the clinic door, she heard vehicles approaching. Through the window, she saw military trucks surrounding the building. Lieutenant Vargas stepped out of the lead vehicle, followed by 6 soldiers. Maria Elena's heart pounded as she realized someone must have informed them about the planned rescue operation. "Miss Vasquez!" Lieutenant Vargas called out as his soldiers positioned themselves around the clinic. "We need to have another conversation with you. Please step outside." Maria Elena had no choice but to comply. As she walked toward the lieutenant, she saw Ana Guerrero hiding behind a nearby building, still holding her sick son. Maria Elena tried not to look in their direction, hoping they would remain unnoticed. "We have received information that you are involved in illegal activities," Lieutenant Vargas said coldly. "Activities that aid enemies of the state. You will come with us for extended questioning." This time, there was no polite conversation or classroom setting. Maria Elena was handcuffed and placed in the back of a military truck. As they drove away from the clinic, she caught a glimpse of Ana disappearing into the shadows with Miguel. She hoped they would find another way to get help. The truck took Maria Elena to a military compound outside the village, where she was placed in a small concrete cell with no windows. The only light came from a bare bulb hanging from the ceiling, and the only furniture was a thin mattress on the floor. For the next week, Maria Elena was interrogated daily by different officers. They wanted names of people she had treated, details about rebel activities in the village, and information about the underground network helping people escape. Each time, Maria Elena gave the same answers. She was a nurse who helped sick people, and she had no knowledge of political or military activities. The questions became more aggressive, and the treatment grew harsher. Maria Elena was given little food and water, and she was not allowed to sleep for more than a few hours at a time. The constant interrogations and sleep deprivation began to take a physical and mental toll. On the 8th day of her imprisonment, something happened that would haunt Maria Elena for the rest of her life. She was brought to a large room where Lieutenant Vargas stood next to a table covered with photographs. "Miss Vasquez," he said, spreading the photos in front of her, "we found these images of known rebel fighters who received medical treatment. We believe you treated these people. If you continue to deny your involvement, we will have no choice but to assume you are a rebel yourself." Maria Elena looked at the photographs and recognized several faces. There was the young man with the bullet wound she had treated weeks earlier. There was an elderly woman she had helped when she collapsed from exhaustion. There was a teenage girl who had come to the clinic with injuries from falling down a ravine while running from soldiers. "Lieutenant," Maria Elena said, trying to keep her voice steady, "I treated these people because they were hurt and needed medical attention. That's what nurses do. I never asked them about politics or which side they supported." Lieutenant Vargas slammed his hand on the table. "You are protecting enemies of the state. Your Noble Nurse Act doesn't fool me. You are either working directly with the rebels or you are so naive that you're helping them without realizing it. Either way, you are a threat to security." That night, Maria Elena was moved to a different cell, one that was smaller and completely dark. She could hear other prisoners crying or talking to themselves in nearby cells. The sound filled her with despair, and for the first time since her arrest, she began to wonder if she would ever see freedom again. The interrogations continued for another week, but now they included physical intimidation. Maria Elena was forced to stand for hours without rest, exposed to bright lights, and subjected to loud noises that made it impossible to think clearly. She began to lose track of time and had difficulty remembering details about her life before the arrest. During one particularly brutal session, Lieutenant Vargas brought in a new officer, a colonel who had arrived from the capital with orders to extract information by any means necessary. The colonel was a thin man with cold eyes who spoke in a quiet voice that was somehow more frightening than shouting. "Miss Vasquez," the colonel said, studying her exhausted face, "I'm going to be very clear with you. We know that you helped organize the transport network that has been moving rebels and their families to safety. We have witnesses who saw you meeting with known rebel operatives. If you confess and provide us with names and locations, your sentence will be reduced." Maria Elena realized that someone had indeed betrayed her, but she still refused to provide information that could harm innocent people. "Colonel, I helped one sick child and his mother. If that makes me a criminal, then I accept whatever punishment you decide." The colonel nodded to Lieutenant Vargas, who stepped forward with a look of satisfaction on his face. "Very well, Miss Vasquez. Since cooperation is not possible, we will proceed with other methods of persuasion." What followed were the darkest days of Maria Elena's life. She was subjected to systematic abuse designed to break her spirit and force her to reveal information about the underground network. The physical and psychological torture left marks on her body and scars on her soul that would never fully heal. Through it all, Maria Elena held on to two things that kept her sanity intact. First was the memory of her parents, who had taught her that helping others was the most important thing a person could do with their life. Second was the image of little Miguel's face and her hope that somehow he had received the medical care he needed to survive. After 3 weeks in the military compound, Maria Elena had lost considerable weight and suffered injuries that would take months to heal. Her interrogators had failed to break her completely, but they had extracted enough information to damage the underground network significantly. Several safe houses had been raided, and some of the people who had been helping refugees escape had been arrested. On a cold morning in early December, Maria Elena was informed that she was being transferred to a prison facility in another province. As she was loaded into a transport truck with other prisoners, she had no way of knowing that news of her arrest and treatment had reached people who would soon take action to help her. Among those people was a general in the rebel forces who had been searching for his missing daughter for over a year. His name was General Roberto Vasquez, and Maria Elena was the child he thought he had lost forever. General Roberto Vasquez had been fighting in the mountains for 18 months, leading a rebel group that operated in the northern provinces. He was a man transformed by loss and war, bearing little resemblance to the kind father who had once read bedtime stories to his daughter and taught her to tend the small garden behind their house. Before the war, Roberto had been a history teacher at the regional university, married to Isabella, a doctor who ran a small clinic in the town of Valle Verde. They had one child together, Maria Elena, who had inherited her mother's compassion and her father's determination. The family had lived a peaceful, modest life until government forces began targeting intellectuals and professionals who they suspected of opposing the regime. The nightmare began when Isabella was killed during a raid on her clinic. Government soldiers claimed she had been treating rebel fighters, which was true only in the sense that she, like her daughter would later do, treated anyone who needed medical care regardless of their politics. Roberto and Maria Elena had been away visiting Isabella's sister when the attack happened, and they returned to find their world destroyed. In the chaos that followed, Roberto and Maria Elena were separated while fleeing. Roberto was captured and imprisoned for 6 months before escaping during a prisoner transport. When he finally made it back to their hometown, he learned that Maria Elena had disappeared. Some people said she had been killed, others claimed she had fled to another country. Roberto spent months searching for her before joining the rebel forces, driven by grief and a desire for justice. For over a year, General Vasquez had used his position to search for information about his missing daughter. He had contacts throughout the region who kept him informed about government activities, prisoner transfers, and refugee movements. He had never given up hope that Maria Elena was alive somewhere, perhaps living under a different name or hiding in a remote village. That hope was rekindled when one of his informants brought him disturbing news. A nurse named Maria Elena Vasquez had been arrested in the village of San Miguel and was being held at a military compound. The informant had managed to obtain a prisoner manifest that included her name, age, and physical description. "General," his lieutenant, Captain Morales, said carefully, "we can't be certain this is your daughter. Vasquez is a common name, and there could be many young women named Maria Elena in the region." But Roberto knew in his heart that it was her. The age was right, the profession made sense, given her mother's influence, and the location was consistent with the path she might have taken when they were separated. He immediately began planning a rescue operation, even though it would be extremely dangerous and could compromise his unit's current mission. The military compound where Maria Elena was being held was heavily fortified and located in territory controlled by government forces. Any rescue attempt would require precise intelligence, careful timing, and considerable risk. Roberto spent 2 weeks gathering information about guard schedules, building layouts, and prisoner transport procedures. During this time, Roberto's informants brought him more details about Maria Elena's situation that filled him with rage and determination. She had been arrested for providing medical care to anyone who needed it, including people suspected of rebel sympathies. She was being interrogated and mistreated in an attempt to extract information about an underground network that helped people escape the war zone. The description of his daughter's courage and principles reminded Roberto of her mother and strengthened his resolve to rescue her. He began to understand that Maria Elena had become exactly the kind of person he and Isabella had hoped she would be. Someone who put compassion above personal safety and who stood by her principles even in the face of danger. Roberto's opportunity came when his informants learned that Maria Elena was scheduled to be transferred to a prison facility in another province. The transfer would involve a convoy of trucks traveling through mountain roads that passed near rebel-controlled territory. It would be the best chance for a rescue operation. On the day of the transfer, Roberto positioned his fighters along a remote stretch of road where the convoy would be forced to slow down due to a sharp curve. The plan was to disable the vehicles, rescue Maria Elena, and retreat to the mountains before government reinforcements could arrive. The operation went exactly as planned until the moment Roberto saw his daughter. When the truck doors opened and the prisoners were ordered out, Roberto immediately recognized Maria Elena, despite the dramatic changes in her appearance. She had lost significant weight, her clothes were torn and dirty, and her face bore the unmistakable marks of abuse. But it was the violet bruises around her eyes and on her cheeks that broke Roberto's heart and filled him with murderous rage. His beautiful, gentle daughter had been brutally beaten by the same kind of people who had killed her mother and destroyed their family. For a moment, Roberto forgot about the military operation, the danger of government reinforcements, and his responsibilities as a commander. All he could see was his child, injured and traumatized, but alive. All he could think about was the year of uncertainty and fear he had endured, wondering if he would ever see her again. "Maria Elena," he called out softly, stepping forward as his fighters secured the area. Maria Elena looked up, confused and disoriented. She had been prepared for another transfer to another prison, not a rescue by rebel forces. When she saw the man approaching her, something about his voice and his face seemed familiar, but her mind struggled to process what she was seeing. "Papa," she whispered uncertainly, hardly daring to believe what her eyes were telling her. Roberto pulled off his military cap and moved closer, his own eyes filling with tears. "Yes, my love, it's me." The recognition hit Maria Elena like a physical blow. The father she had feared was dead was standing in front of her, older and harder than she remembered, but unmistakably the man who had raised her with love and taught her to stand up for what was right. "You survived," Roberto whispered, reaching out to touch her face gently, careful not to aggravate her injuries. The violet marks on her skin made his hands shake with emotion. The simple question contained everything. His fear that she had been killed, his desperate search for information about her fate, his guilt at not being able to protect her, and his overwhelming relief at finally finding her alive. Maria Elena collapsed into her father's arms, and both of them began to cry. Roberto held his daughter carefully, feeling how thin she had become and noticing the way she flinched slightly at physical contact. He understood that she had been through experiences that had changed her forever, just as the war had changed him. "I never stopped looking for you," Roberto said, his voice breaking. "Even when people told me you were dead, I knew you were alive somewhere. I knew you were strong enough to survive anything." Captain Morales approached respectfully but urgently. "General, we need to move. Government reinforcements will be here within the hour." Roberto nodded, but didn't release his daughter. "Can you walk, Maria Elena? We need to get to the mountains." Maria Elena straightened up, wiping her eyes and drawing on the inner strength that had sustained her through weeks of imprisonment and interrogation. "Yes, Papa, I can walk." As they made their way toward the rebel vehicles that would take them to safety, Maria Elena told her father about her work at the clinic, her arrest, and her treatment in custody. Roberto listened with a mixture of pride and fury, amazed by his daughter's courage and appalled by what she had endured. "Your mother would be so proud of you," Roberto said as they climbed into the back of a truck. "You became exactly what she hoped you would become, a healer who puts others before herself." "What happened to Mama?" Maria Elena asked, though she feared she already knew the answer. Roberto told her about Isabella's death and the events that had led to their separation and his decision to join the rebel forces. As painful as the truth was, Maria Elena was grateful to finally know what had happened to her family and to understand her father's transformation from teacher to revolutionary. The truck convoy traveled through the night, winding through mountain roads toward a rebel base camp hidden in a valley surrounded by dense forest. During the journey, Roberto and Maria Elena began the long process of reconnecting and healing from their shared trauma. Maria Elena learned that her father had become a respected leader in the rebel forces, known for his strategic thinking and his insistence on protecting civilians. Roberto learned that his daughter had inherited not only her mother's medical skills, but also an unshakable commitment to helping others that had made her willing to risk everything for strangers. When they reached the base camp, Maria Elena was amazed to discover a functioning community hidden in the mountains. There were families who had fled the war, former professionals who had joined the rebel cause, and fighters from various backgrounds united by their opposition to the government's brutality. Most importantly, there was a medical facility where Maria Elena could use her nursing skills to help people who desperately needed care. The base camp's doctor, an elderly man named Dr. Herrera, welcomed her enthusiastically and immediately put her to work treating wounded fighters and sick children. "Finally," Dr. Herrera said with relief, "someone with proper medical training who understands that our mission is to preserve life, not just fight for political causes." As weeks passed, Maria Elena began to heal physically and emotionally. The violet marks on her face faded, her strength returned, and she found purpose in caring for the people in the camp. She established protocols for treating combat injuries, set up a vaccination program for children, and organized training sessions to teach basic first aid to fighters and civilians. Roberto watched his daughter's recovery with amazement and gratitude. Despite everything she had been through, Maria Elena had not lost her essential nature. She was still the compassionate, determined person who would risk her own safety to help others. If anything, her experiences had strengthened her commitment to healing and justice. One evening, as father and daughter sat together outside the medical tent, Maria Elena asked Roberto about his plans for the future. "When this war ends, Papa, what will you do? Will you go back to teaching?" Roberto considered the question carefully. "I don't know if the man I was before can exist anymore, Maria Elena. This war has changed me in ways I'm still trying to understand. But seeing you again, seeing the person you've become, gives me hope that some things survive even the worst circumstances. Maybe we can build something new together," Maria Elena suggested. "A place where people like you can teach, and people like me can heal. A place where children can grow up without fear." Roberto smiled at his daughter, seeing in her words the possibility of redemption and renewal that he had almost stopped believing in. "Yes," he said, taking her hand carefully. "When this war ends, we'll build something better. For your mother's memory, and for all the people who deserve to live in peace." The violet marks on Maria Elena's face had faded completely, but the strength and wisdom she had gained through her ordeal would remain with her forever. She had survived imprisonment, torture, and separation from her family, but she had not allowed those experiences to destroy her capacity for compassion. In finding each other again, Roberto and Maria Elena had also found hope for their own healing and for their country's future. Their reunion was not just the end of a long search, but the beginning of a new chapter in which they would work together to create the kind of world they both believed was possible.